opportunity to have the company reassess whether there's broad-based support for some of these things, right? And also provide some kind of accommodation for those who may not agree with it. So that's one way of bringing Catholic faith into our workplaces. Now, I am very fortunate to work for an organization that opposes a lot of this stuff, so I'm not really ever asked to do something that kind of goes against my principles or my faith, one of the great blessings in my life. But I think it's also incumbent on all of us to be active in our local communities. So I still go to the parish I was baptized in. I am very active in my Catholic Academy. I'm the treasurer of that academy that I attended as a youngster, because I believe in the value of continuity and I believe in the value of preserving institutions. And it is very hard to maintain institutions over decades. I mean, the fact that the Players Club has survived is a remarkable feat, right? And so we kind of need a patron saint of maintenance, in my opinion. You know, we've got all these amazing institutions. Thank God we do. And I'm sure we're going to need new ones for our circumstances today. But by God, do we have a lot of work to do in maintaining the great inheritance that we've been so blessed to receive, right? And that's part of our challenge as Catholics, living in communities, to have that sense of responsibility, that sense of solidarity, and that sense of community to want to perpetuate this for the benefit of those to come.
And this was kind of a crisis point, because like, I know how the profession is, I know what the reaction is going to be, but this was kind of like, to the extent I have like a little version of a Thomas More moment, it's a big deal, right? Because I had to stop and I had to evaluate, well, what does God want me to do here, right? And the reason I bring this up is because I think courage is not just go in guns blazing, don't be a coward, right? That's one side of the courage analysis. We also have to not be foolish or stupid, right? So I prayed, I consulted with my wife, right? Because I have little children and I have to feed them. So as this was coming along, I talked to my wife. I said, listen, this is coming down the pike. I obviously can't support what the administration is trying to do, and I will not argue for it in court, and I'm going to actively oppose it in the administration. Like, what do we do, right? And my wife is a saintly woman and said, well, there's only one thing you can do, because you can't support it, so you can either quit or you can fight and see if you can make a difference, and then eventually quit or get fired, right? So that's the story of why I now work at the Napa Legal Institute. But I want to say something else about that, because I guess first of all, courage does involve prudence, it does involve discernment, right? Because if you're going to be imminently fired and be unable to feed your kids, like maybe you can't do the immoral thing, right? But maybe there are more subdued or more subtle ways of dealing with the problem where you're not doing the immoral thing, but you're still not getting yourself fired and leaving your family on the street, right? So that's one point, is that this does involve prudence. Don't just charge in, but you also have to do the hard things sometimes. The other thing I would say, though, and this is to John's point, right? John's at the Manhattan Institute, Mary Margaret and I work at the Napa Legal Institute. So in my personal capacity, I'm privileged to write essays on like every controversial thing that if I worked where a lot of you folks work, I would get canceled. But my point is that when I write and I like say things opposing, you've done a lot of this work too. It could be the LGBT thing, it could be a trans issue, it could be I got myself in hot water for opposing First Amendment rights of Satanists. That's for conversation for a different day. But my point is, that's not particularly courageous, because I work in a cancel-proof job, right? So I think it's worth evaluating that most of you folks work for secular organizations. So very small areas where you can stand up, where you can make a difference, are probably in fact a lot more courageous than any of the crazy stances I take on things, because your circumstances are different. So it's important to evaluate that, right? Your family life, your professional life, where you are. Sometimes we do have to do the hard things, but sometimes a little bit goes a long way and actually can be quite courageous.
Great. I think when we were preparing for this panel, we talked a lot about how all the virtues are implicated with courage, and prudence and wisdom are so important. And I think I want to say C.S. Lewis talks about how it's important to, rather than judge something, to first start by defining or describing it. So I think you want to kind of know your enemy here And then the workplace, I think you'll run into two types of challenges that are really going to implicate courage in a clear way. One would be ethical, the other would be ideological. So if you're in a workplace where ideologically they don't understand the Christian worldview, you can play the long game and live a Christian witness and look for opportunities to put others first and just let Christ work through that example. But if you're in an ethical situation where, like Frank's, you can't really play the long game. Swift action is needed, and I would say the best way to prepare for that is to prepare for that. If you know an ethical dilemma is part of the landscape for your industry, you want to start by making a discernment. Is this actually an ethical issue? Seek counsel. You want to have your war room already ready, or your cabinet, or your counsel, or whatever, who you're going to call when that happens, and then don't bargain with it. Once you know what you're dealing with, once you know you're dealing with an issue of right or wrong, then be proactive. Don't wait for it to come up. Just schedule that meeting if it needs to happen. And Frank did this was incredibly proactive in addressing this situation. So I think he showed courage, but also a lot of prudence and wisdom in the way he approached that situation.
You know, John, I thought you spoke, so eloquently earlier about cities.